Okay, now we're going to talk about the gradient map adjustment layer. In our palette, or layers palette, we go to adjustment layer. Let's do gradient map. Right away, we see that our gradient is backwards, and then we also see that we have a grayscale gradient here. And what's happening is we've got from white to black, and what Photoshop is trying to do is take the values that are in your image and sort of map them into the gradient. So the first thing we want to do here is reverse the gradient. So we click this reverse button, and you can see that it looks a little more normal to what we're expecting to see. And dither, you can click that on or off. And what dither does is usually help break down the banding that's within the gradient, depending on the values that you've chosen. So let's click on our gradient. And so I have my gradient presets here, and I could try some different ones. And you can see the results of what's happening here. And it's actually pretty cool that you can do some different things with the gradient map, especially if you're stylizing some drawings or whatnot. But we're going to create a new one here, and let me set this back to black and white. Now you can see that our contrast is sort of gone, or if we want more contrast, we could bring in our black. So if we start dragging this to the left, you can see that our contrast is coming back. So let's bring this into like 60 here. So it's kind of a good range. We've got some darks and we got some lights and some mid values that make this a little more readable to the eye. And I don't know, let's choose a color. Maybe we want this to be like a dark blue or something. So you can see that it's tinting it a little bit. And what we can also do is add different colors or different steps in the middle to create just different values. So if we have blue there, let's just add in a little bit of something like, yeah, I don't know, let's try green. So you can see that the green is adding the mid values in. Maybe that's too saturated and too dark, so let's brighten that up a little bit. And maybe we want to add a little bit more in there. So we could take another color and maybe let's drop in a little bit of yellow, which is that's kind of ugly. But let's tweak it to make it work. So maybe it's too saturated. Let's bring this down to just a light tint. Sorry, maybe it's too bright. And desaturate this a little bit more. To something like that. And then we could even take this further and just make an in-between color. And let's go ahead and just add like a darker value that's below, that's in between our darkest and our mid value. And let's tweak this color. That might be too saturated, but it does have an interesting look to it. And maybe make it a little bit darker. So, and there we go. And let's just add this to our gradient here. So you can see what's happening here is when we're done, we have our original, which this was kind of a marker rendering, and then we're remapping it with the gradient map. And it changes the look of it completely. And then here's the other one that I did, which that one's not so good. Let me grab that. And so this one's not, it's kind of washed out, so let's go ahead and tweak this. Tweak this one, sort of the same way that we did before. Adds a little bit more contrast. Goes in here. So I'm just going to add a tint of like yellow, or maybe a little bit of, just a tiny bit of green, and then just tweak it into our liking. Push it into a green just a little bit. I'm going to push this in the yellow a little bit, just to create just a different look to our sketch here. So we have our gradient map here that we just created, or I just edited that one. And we have another one that we just made. And that's essentially what the gradient map does. Now, we could show you an example of what this does to a photograph. A drawing is pretty straightforward. Like when you're looking at this, you can see that there's just values that it's being remapped to with the colors, so it's one for one. A photograph does the exact same thing, but it's a little more complicated. I'm going to open an image here. Oops. Let's choose this guy. It's got a bunch of different values in here. It's not sort of duotone like that drawing. So we're going to pop in our gradient map. You can see right away, like we're inverted here. So we're going to reverse it. So what this did is just remap this photograph to sort of grayscale using our gradient. And you can click on your gradient. And again, you could just kind of play around, see whatever you have, see if anything works to your liking. But you could get some neat effects in here. You could see this kind of has like an outline or whatever. But you could design a gradient and go from there. So you could stylize photographs this way. You know, obviously if you drag this in, it's killing your range to just black and white. It's kind of crunching it down, giving you just sort of some highlights, which this you can use on top of other things. You know, for example, let's say we like that. Let's duplicate our background. Or let's not duplicate it. Let's go ahead and do a copy merged. And let's paste that on top. So you can see we removed our gradient. We have this one. And then we could go ahead and do like an add on top of this. And it's kind of adding in like more effect. Or we can go ahead and blur. Let's blur this out. And almost sort of create like a fake bloom effect. So another way that you can use the gradient map. Getting back to it, let's look at our gradient. And this one, let's just kind of do a rainbow of colors here. And we'll unreverse it, so it'll give us what we're looking for. And from here, go ahead and design your gradient however you want it to look. This one's, you know, a little bit wacky, but the trick is with the gradient map is one end should always have your brightest and the other end needs to have your darkest. So these two values here are pretty similar, so it's not really getting that range. The range sort of disappears. So let's create a white here. If I could do that for some reason. And you can see that it added that white range in. And then let's pull back these guys and get more white in there. So this color's just not really working, so I'm going to tweak this a little bit. And you could just create different effects here. It kind of has like a screen printing effect almost. And you could design your image this way. So maybe you don't like this blue. Maybe you want to pull it more into the orange. Kind of make that work a little bit better. And maybe you don't want a pure white in this. Maybe you want something that's just, you know, like I said, kind of like this weird screen print type deal. And this color's just kind of not really working, so I'm going to pull that out. And so with the gradient things in the middle, you could kind of create more of a step look, and crunch your values there. And so you could see that you could kind of design and change your image based off the gradient map. And it's non-destructive too. Since it's an adjustment layer, your image always retains the same parts. And then you have our little stylization layer there, which we could do add or maybe overlay or whatever you want. The gradient map is a really interesting adjustment layer. You could stylize photos with it, you could stylize drawings, you could remap their color palette, and it's really flexible, so it's definitely a pretty cool and powerful tool to use within Photoshop.